The morning shift always began before sunrise. Daniel Carter, a widowed single father, quietly pushed his janitor's cart through the gleaming halls of the city's tallest office tower. While executives rushed past him without a second glance, Daniel took pride in making every floor spotless. To him, no job was too small. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, often reminded him, "Dad, you make the building shine." Those simple words gave him enough strength to face another exhausting day. The building belonged to Carter and Vale Industries, a billion-dollar company led by its young and highly respected CEO, Victoria Hayes. Employees admired her intelligence and determination, but they also knew she rarely smiled. Endless board meetings, demanding investors, and constant public attention had built an invisible wall around her. Daniel had seen Victoria only a handful of times. Whenever she passed through the lobby, surrounded by assistants and security guards, he simply nodded politely and continued mopping the floor. He never expected her to know his name. One rainy evening, after nearly everyone had left the office, Daniel was cleaning outside the executive conference room when Victoria hurried out. She looked unusually nervous, checking her watch every few seconds. Before Daniel could move aside, she stopped directly in front of him. "Daniel, right?" she asked. He blinked in surprise. "Yes, ma'am, I need your help." Daniel looked around, assuming she was speaking to someone else. "My help?" Victoria took a slow breath. "In a few minutes, several important investors are arriving. One of them won't stop pressuring me about my personal life. I need to avoid another embarrassing conversation." Daniel frowned, unsure where this was leading. She hesitated before saying something that sounded unbelievable. "I know this is an unusual request, but pretend you kiss me for 10 minutes. Daniel stared at her, convinced he had misunderstood. "I'm not asking for anything real," Victoria quickly explained. "I just need everyone watching to believe we're already in a relationship. Once they leave, it's over. I'll make sure you're rewarded for your time." The hallway fell completely silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the glass windows. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment and thought of his daughter waiting at home. Money would certainly help. Bills were piling up, and Lily needed new school supplies. But something inside him refused to let desperation decide for him. When he looked back at Victoria, his expression remained calm. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I can't do that. My daughter is growing up watching every choice I make. One day she'll ask me what kind of man her father was. I want to give her an answer I'll always be proud of." Victoria stood speechless. No one had ever turned down her request, not because they feared her, but because they valued their principles more than money. In that quiet hallway, she realized the humble janitor possessed something many powerful people around her had lost: unwavering integrity. Victoria remained silent for several seconds. The confidence she carried into every boardroom seemed to disappear as she looked at Daniel. She had expected surprise, hesitation, or even an eager acceptance. What she had never imagined was a polite refusal based on personal values. "I understand," she finally said, her voice softer than before. "I shouldn't have put you in that position." Daniel gave a small nod. "Thank you, ma'am." Just then, the elevator doors opened. A group of sharply dressed investors stepped into the hallway, laughing as they approached the executive conference room. Victoria straightened her jacket, took a deep breath, and prepared herself. One of the investors, Richard Monroe, smiled the moment he saw her. "Victoria," he called, "still working harder than everyone else? Tell me, have you finally found someone who can convince you to take a vacation?" A few people chuckled. Victoria smiled politely but didn't answer. Richard continued, "You know, a successful CEO should have a successful partner. Investors like stability." Daniel quietly continued wiping the floor, pretending not to hear the conversation. Victoria looked directly at Richard. "My personal life has never affected the performance of this company," she replied calmly. "Our profits, employee satisfaction, and customer growth speak for themselves. I believe those are the numbers that matter." The hallway became quiet. Several investors exchanged approving glances. One of the older board members nodded with a faint smile, impressed by her confidence. Richard cleared his throat, realizing he had pushed too far. "Fair enough," he muttered before following the others into the conference room. As the doors closed, Victoria let out a long breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. She turned toward Daniel. "You were right," she admitted. "I didn't need to pretend to be someone I wasn't." Daniel smiled politely. Sometimes the truth is easier to defend than a lie. Victoria thanked him once more and disappeared into the meeting. The next morning, Daniel arrived for his shift as usual. He expected another ordinary day of emptying trash bins, polishing glass doors, and mopping marble floors. Instead, he found a handwritten note resting on his janitor's cart. It read, "Please report to the CEO's office at 10 a.m., Victoria Hayes." Daniel frowned. His first thought was that he had somehow broken a company rule. His second thought was that he might be losing his job. For the next 3 hours, he could barely concentrate. Every minute felt longer than the last. His coworkers noticed his worried expression but couldn't guess the reason. At exactly 10 o'clock, Daniel stood outside the executive office. The receptionist smiled warmly and opened the door. Victoria stood by the large window overlooking the city. She turned as Daniel entered. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Please, have a seat." Daniel remained standing. "If this is about yesterday, I'm sorry if I offended you." Victoria smiled for the first time since they had met. "You didn't offend me, Daniel." She paused before continuing. "You reminded me of the kind of leader, and the kind of person, I wanted to become." Daniel had no idea that this conversation was about to change both of their lives forever. Daniel slowly sat down, still unsure why the CEO herself wanted to speak with him. The office was far grander than any place he had ever worked. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, expensive artwork decorated the walls, and a polished wooden desk stood in the center of the room. Yet despite all the luxury, Victoria looked unusually thoughtful. She folded her hands on the desk. "Daniel, I've spent years building this company," she began. "People admire the success they see from the outside, but very few understand the pressure that comes with it. Every day I'm surrounded by people telling me what I want to hear instead of what I need to hear." Daniel listened quietly. "Yesterday," Victoria continued, "you were the first person in a long time who told me, no. Not because you disliked me, but because your principles mattered more than money." Daniel smiled modestly. "My father always used to say that a person's character is worth more than anything they own. I try to live by that." Victoria nodded. "That's exactly why I asked you here." She reached into a folder and slid a document across the desk. Daniel looked down but didn't touch it. "I've been reviewing employee records," she explained. "You've worked in this building for almost 7 years. Your supervisors describe you as dependable, honest, and hardworking. They also mention that you've never missed a shift without a serious reason." Daniel looked surprised. "I didn't know anyone noticed." "I notice now," Victoria replied. She continued, "Our company is launching a new employee mentorship program. It focuses on workplace culture, responsibility, and leadership through example. I'd like you to be part of it." Daniel blinked. "I'm just a janitor." "No," Victoria said gently. "You're a man who understands integrity. Skills can be taught. Character is much harder to find." Daniel stared at the papers. The position came with regular daytime hours, paid training, and nearly double his current salary. Most importantly, it would allow him to spend evenings with Lily instead of working late-night cleaning shifts. His eyes filled with emotion. This would change everything for my daughter." Victoria smiled. "I was hoping it would." Just then, Daniel's phone buzzed. He apologized and glanced at the screen. It was a message from Lily's teacher. "Lily won first place in the school reading competition today. She keeps saying she can't wait to tell her dad." Daniel couldn't help smiling. Victoria noticed the look on his face. "Good news. My daughter won a school competition," he said proudly. "She's worked so hard for it." Victoria laughed softly. "Then I think you should leave work a little early today." Daniel looked confused. "But my shift." "I'll make sure it's covered," she interrupted. Some moments with family are too important to miss. As Daniel left the office with the offer in his hands, he realized that the greatest reward wasn't the promotion or the higher salary. It was the realization that honesty, even when it seemed costly, had opened a door he never imagined possible. And for the first time in many years, Daniel walked through the company lobby believing that the future held far more than survival, it held hope.